Hey man, those iPads, the yellow one, those look pretty good. Or through Amazon Renewed, you can check out the 2018 iPad Pro, which features a Pro Motion Display A12X chip, which is still perfectly capable in 2023, and it has the quad speakers plus Face ID. But it's old though. But trust me, there's nothing old about it. The iPad Pro actually has a faster USB-C port than the iPad 10 does, and it has Apple Pencil 2 support, which is far superior than the USB-C to Lightning adapter plus Lightning cable you're gonna have to use every time you want to attach the Apple Pencil 1 to the USB-C port on the iPad 10. Well, yeah, but it's old. Who cares if it's old? It's just so... Does it come in yellow? Let's begin. This comes up a lot in the never-ending battle we have on this channel where we talk about, should I buy new thing or should I buy refurbished/renewed older thing on third-party site? Happens with iPhones all the time, but a lot of the justification people have for buying the newest or latest greatest Apple product, even if it has worse specs than, say, a cheaper product you can find on Amazon or through Apple Certified Refurbished, a lot of the concern just comes down to, well, ultimately, the new thing has a newer chip, therefore it's going to get more years of software support, therefore it's the better buy. And while there's absolutely some truth to that, I agree, I think that there's a little bit more to it than people aren't necessarily considering. Like, as we've discovered in my iOS 16 on the iPhone 10 video, yes, I gotta admit, it's very, very cool that a phone that Apple made from 2017 is still gaining features and gaining functionality all these years later thanks to iOS 16. And I personally think the iPhone 10 will likely get iOS 17, but what does that really mean though? Like, it will get it. Like, sure, Apple will list it on the website that says it's compatible with these devices, but if you go back and watch that video, you'll notice how there's a ton of features, including two of my favorite parts of iOS 16, which are continuity camera and subject lift, that didn't even come to the iPhone 10. So, well, yeah, in conversation, it's really fun to be able to say, you know, iPhones get 6 to 7 years of software support. A lot of the time, they're not gaining what is kind of the most exciting or most useful features of that update. So it's kind of obvious with features like continuity camera or live text or subject lift when it comes to older phones with older chips, but I think it starts to become really bizarre when people are prioritizing iPadOS updates between different iPads. Like, that was the most common scenario I was running into when Apple dropped the iPad 10 or, you know, the iPad Air, and I was always comparing it to previous generation iPad Pros because the 2018 iPad Pro has been out for so long that you can find them for real cheap now, secondhand or refurbished, and they still, even though they're older, have a lot of superior hardware, whether it be quad speakers or even the option of having a 12.9-inch screen, and they'll have faster USB-C ports, or they'll have even faster chips, like the A12X in many use cases beats out the performance of the A14 chip. But people are concerned about how many years of support their iPad will get, so they'll buy the newer one just because it's new and it's got a more recent generation chip, so they feel like, well, this one's got to get 7, 8+ years of software support. 2018 iPad Pro, that came out, 4 or 5 years ago, that means the number of software support years it has left is likely more limited. But the issue I take with that is when Apple starts more software restricting of certain features, and we saw this unfold with Stage Manager, and now Apple has elected that Stage Manager can work on older iPad Pros with the A12X chip, but they don't want to give it to any iPad that doesn't have an A12X chip or better, which means the people who spent the extra money on the iPad Air 4, even though it has 60 hertz and it has Touch ID instead of Face ID, and even though there was proof that, well, A12X in some circumstances might be faster than the A14, but the A14 is just newer, and that will give me, Apple Music Sing compatibility, so we don't talk about Bruno. Therefore, I'm gonna buy the iPad Air, even though a lot of the display specs and a lot of the overall performance is worse because I want more software support. Well, now here we are, and Apple's giving some of the biggest iPad exclusive software features to the A12X chip, but not the A14, because Apple dictated, yeah, no, that one's not good enough for it. So when iPadOS updates get really picky like this, and they say, oh, actually, to take advantage of Apple Pencil Hover, you need the M2 chip, or to take advantage of full external monitor support, you need the M1 chip, and they're software locking out a lot of features from iPads that are only 2 years old, 3 years old. I mean, if we ignore Stage Manager manager in external monitor support. What did they change with iPadOS 16 other than all of the basic, iMessage functionality that came to iOS anyway? Basically, you got the weather app. Like, people will spend hundreds of dollars extra on a different iPad or a worse iPad simply because, well, iPadOS 16 needs to be compatible and I really wanted that weather app. So that's why I spent the extra money. It's like people would rather live longer with worse hardware than have a device with better hardware, even if it doesn't get as many years of software support. But I just want to remind people that the device doesn't, explode if it stops getting updates. There's many people in my personal life still on iPhone 7s and iPhone 6s, and they're still utilizing the basic apps and functionality that their phone needs, despite not getting the latest version of iOS. So, especially when it comes to iPads, I feel like it's kind of a weird thing to assume that, well, this one might get 2 or 3 years more software support, but the truth is, when we're in that realm and we're 6 to 7 years down the road, there's going to be all kinds of software features for the M5, M6 iPad Pro that your iPad's not going to get anyway. So, is all that matters is that it's running the latest version? Like, you go into settings, you check about it, it has, a certain number that makes you happy? Or is it about the features themselves being more up-to-date or more modern, whether that's Face ID or ProMotion or higher speed USB-C ports that can last the test of time rather than sticking with a USB 2 speed port on the iPad? And I think we may start to see a very similar pattern when it comes to Intel Macs versus Apple Silicon Macs. There's already some subject lift or live text features that Apple is incorporating into the Apple Silicon Macs, but they can't necessarily bring them to the older Intel Macs, despite the fact that Apple says, macOS Ventura works on a lot of these older Intel Macs. So it checks the box and it's compatible, but every year there's less and less features that actually make it back to that older Mac. So to a certain extent, yes, security updates are important, and to make sure that third-party app support continues to work on older generations, I get why people want to prioritize it. I'm not saying you're completely wrong, but I think a lot of the time that software support, which is also theoretical, we don't know exactly how long Apple's going to promise software support for a lot of these iPads and Macs, but as time goes on, I think people should start to maybe deprioritize it a little bit and focus more on just how good the overall hardware is. What do you want to live with on a daily basis? And keep in mind that as Apple Silicon gets faster and more efficient and better, it tends to result in software support lasting longer, like the A8X chip in the iPad Air 2 ended up getting 7 or 8 years of software support. So how long does that mean we're gonna get support on the A10X or the A12X or these M1, M2 iPads? We might already be approaching the scope of 8 to 10, maybe over 10 years of software support as it becomes more and more difficult for Apple to improve the speed and efficiency of their silicon. With that being the case, are you really going to spend the extra money on a newer iPad or a newer Mac with worse hardware instead of buying last generation new hardware for the sake of, well, how many years of software support is that older Mac going to get? Because you may be splitting hairs at the difference between 8 years of software support and 10 years of software support. So either way, the machine is probably going to last you a very, very long time. And if you're the type of person to be watching tech videos like this one, how many of you are actually planning on buying a Mac or an iPad and just using that device for the next 8 to 10 years, and you don't think any other color option or any other new product that Apple marketing is able to wave their magic wand over your eyes for, you don't think you're going to upgrade for that long? All the power to you, by the way, if you can make it that long. I think it's great. But if you're that obsessed with new color option, or that older iPad or that older Mac is not the newest and latest greatest thing, if you're obsessed with latest and greatest, then you shouldn't be worried about 8 years versus 6 years of software support, because you'll get distracted by some other shiny flashy thing Apple comes out with in the next 5 years, and then you'll be upgrading again. So hopefully that kind of helps you rethink your strategy when purchasing new versus older tech, and I hope this video can be a positive influence for your bank accounts and your overall enjoyment of tech in your life. What do you guys think? Is spending the extra money on worse hardware for more software support worth it to you or not? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you all in the next one.